While you're cranking your thermostat to 75 degrees, Native Americans stayed cozy in 40 degrees blizzards using nothing but what nature provided. But here's what doesn't make sense. How did thin buffalo hide outperform your insulated walls? The Great Plains in winter could kill you in hours. Temperatures dropped to -40, winds howled at 50 miles per hour, and snow piled up higher than a horse. Yet Native American families thrived in these conditions for thousands of years, staying warm and comfortable in what looks like just a simple tent. But here's the thing. Calling a teepee a tent is like calling a Formula One car a bicycle. These weren't random shelters thrown together. They were precision-engineered heating systems that would make modern HVAC technicians jealous. The genius started with the fire pit, placed in a carefully dug 6-inch depression right in the center. This wasn't just a hole in the ground. Those 6 inches created perfect airflow control, with small ground vents that fed oxygen to the flames while preventing dangerous backdrafts. The fire burned cleaner, hotter, and safer than any campfire you've ever seen. Then, there's the smoke flap system at the top. These adjustable flaps worked like primitive central heating controls. Open them to let smoke escape, close them to trap every bit of precious heat inside. The really clever part? They could be adjusted from inside the teepee using long poles, so nobody had to brave the freezing wind outside. The double-wall insulation system was pure brilliance. Interior liners made from animal hides created an air gap that trapped heated air up to 12 feet high. No drafts, no cold spots, just consistent warmth throughout the entire space. Meanwhile, the strategic orientation placed the door facing east, away from those brutal winter winds, and camps were positioned between natural windbreaks like hills or tree lines. One fully functional teepee required at least 13 buffalo hides and could be completely assembled in under an hour. That's faster than most people can set up a modern camping tent, and this thing could handle weather that would destroy any store-bought shelter. The whole system worked together like clockwork, but the real magic happened with those smoke flaps at the top. Smoke flaps were the secret weapon that most people completely misunderstand about teepees. These weren't just random holes at the top. They were precision-engineered climate control systems that would make modern HVAC technicians jealous. Here's the brilliant part. Smoke flaps could be opened or closed independently, creating a perfect balance between letting smoke escape and keeping precious heat trapped inside. The flaps worked like adjustable vents, allowing families to fine-tune their indoor environment based on wind direction and weather conditions. When winter winds howled across the plains, experienced teepee dwellers would position these flaps to create optimal airflow. Open them wrong, your family freezes while smoke chokes everyone inside. Get it right? The teepee becomes a warm, breathable sanctuary, even in brutal cold. The flaps doubled as primitive central heating controls, closed them partially during the coldest nights, and heated air stayed trapped in the upper portion of the teepee, radiating warmth downward. Open them strategically during the day, and fresh air circulated without creating uncomfortable drafts at ground level where people slept. Wind direction changed everything about flap positioning. Smart families constantly adjusted these flaps throughout the day, reading air currents like seasoned sailors. A slight shift in wind could mean the difference between comfortable warmth and a smoke-filled disaster. Then there's the engineering genius behind the flap mechanism itself. Long wooden poles attached to the flaps allowed easy adjustment from inside the teepee, meaning no one had to venture into freezing temperatures just to prevent smoke buildup. These poles could be operated even while lying down, making middle-of-the-night adjustments simple. The real mastery showed during storms. Experienced families could partially close flaps to prevent rain or snow from entering while maintaining enough ventilation to keep the fire burning cleanly. This delicate balance required years of practice and intimate knowledge of how air moved through the teepee structure. Getting smoke flap positioning perfect was crucial because families needed consistent heat sources, but maintaining that heat required more than just adjusting vents. It meant mastering the art of keeping fires alive through entire nights without constant attention. The teepee fire wasn't something you just let die out when bedtime rolled around. That would be like throwing away your most valuable possession every single night. Instead, Native American families mastered the art of banking embers, basically keeping fire alive while everyone slept. Here's how it worked. Before heading to bed, they'd rake hot coals into a tight pile and cover them with a thick layer of ash. Not dirt, ash. The ash acted like a blanket, keeping oxygen levels just right so the embers stayed glowing but didn't burst into flames. Come morning, a few pokes and some kindling brought the fire roaring back to life. But wait, it gets smarter. Some families used buffalo dung instead of regular wood for their overnight burns. Sounds gross? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Buffalo chips burned slow and steady, producing almost no smoke while giving off consistent heat for hours. Hardwood coals worked the same way. Oak or hickory chunks could smolder all night without any babysitting. Then there's the travel problem. What happens when you're moving camp and need fire at the next location? Starting a fire from scratch in freezing wind isn't exactly fun. The solution was portable embers. Families carried glowing coals and hollowed out buffalo horns or specially made clay pots lined with moss or grass. These ember carriers could keep coals alive for an entire day's journey. The weird part is how this changed everything about survival. Fire wasn't just something you used, it became a living thing you kept alive, like having a pet that happened to provide warmth, cooking heat, and protection all rolled into one. Families developed ember schedules, taking turns to check and feed the coals throughout long winter nights. This ember mastery meant never facing that terrible moment of being cold and fireless in a blizzard. But keeping embers alive was just one piece of the puzzle. Even with a reliable fire source, you still needed ways to spread that precious heat throughout your sleeping space, which brings us to one of the most brilliant heating tricks ever invented. Banking glowing coals under ash was brilliant, but what happened when the fire died completely during those brutal midnight hours? The Plains tribes had another genius trick up their fur-lined sleeves. Hot stones became their portable heating system. These weren't just any rocks. Families carefully selected dense stones that wouldn't crack or explode when heated. River rocks were absolutely forbidden because trapped water could turn them into dangerous grenades when they got hot. The process was surprisingly simple. Large stones sat right next to the fire pit for hours, soaking up heat like natural batteries. Once they reached scorching temperatures, thick buffalo hide wraps protected hands while moving these makeshift heaters around the teepee interior. But here's where it gets clever. The stones weren't randomly scattered everywhere. Families placed them strategically near sleeping areas, creating zones of gentle, radiant warmth that lasted through the coldest parts of the night. Unlike direct fire, these heated rocks provided consistent temperature without dangerous flames flickering near sleeping children or elders. The heat release was perfectly timed too. Stones gave off their strongest warmth during those first few hours after sunset, exactly when body temperatures naturally drop and people need extra heat to fall asleep comfortably. Then there's the rotation system that kept warmth going all night long. Smart families prepared multiple sets of stones. When the first batch cooled down around midnight, someone would quickly swap them for freshly heated replacements from the banked fire. This tag team approach meant continuous heat without maintaining a roaring fire that consumed precious fuel. The technique worked so well that sleeping areas stayed comfortable even when outside temperatures plummeted to bone-chilling levels. No direct flames meant no smoke, no sparks, and no risk of accidental burns during restless sleep. Well, heated stones solved the nighttime warmth problem beautifully. But what about preventing heat from escaping through those teepee walls in the first place? That's where the real insulation mastery came into play. And it involved way more buffalo hides than most people realize. Getting a fire going was one thing, but staying warm all night without turning into a frozen popsicle, that required some serious layering strategy. Native Americans on the Great Plains turned buffalo hides and animal furs into the world's most effective insulation system. Buffalo hides weren't just thrown around randomly. These massive skins got stretched across the ground as rugs, creating a barrier between sleeping bodies and the frozen earth below. A single buffalo hide could cover enough space for 3 adults, and families often overlapped multiple hides to create thick, cushioned floors that trapped heat like nobody's business. But here's where things got really clever. Animal skins weren't just for sleeping on, they became wall insulation too. Smaller pelts from deer, elk, and even rabbits got layered against the inner teepee walls, creating pockets of trapped air that slowed heat loss dramatically. The thicker the fur, the better it worked. Beaver pelts were especially prized because their dense, oily fur repelled moisture while keeping warmth locked inside. And the weird part is how they handled bedding. Families didn't just pile on random furs and call it good. They created specific layering systems based on fur density and body heat patterns. Softer rabbit or fox furs went closest to skin, while thicker bear or buffalo robes formed the outer protective shell. This wasn't guesswork, it was precision engineering using natural materials. Remember that magic number of 13 buffalo hides needed for a full-size teepee? Well, about half of those weren't even part of the outer structure. They became interior insulation, floor coverings, and bedding systems that transformed a simple tent into a legitimate warm shelter. The remaining hides created overlap zones where extra layers could be added during the coldest nights. Then there is the brilliant detail most people miss entirely. Hide layers didn't just provide warmth, they muffled those bone-chilling winds that could cut right through any shelter. Multiple fur barriers created a quiet, insulated environment where families could actually sleep peacefully instead of shivering all night. Of course, all this layering was just one part of the warmth equation. The real magic happened when families combined these insulation techniques with something even more ingenious. Think about trying to keep a campfire going all night in freezing wind. You'd burn through your entire wood supply before dawn, and someone would have to stay awake feeding logs every hour. The Plains tribes figured out something way smarter. They heated large stones directly in their fires until they were almost glowing. Then came the clever part. These superheated rocks got carefully dropped into containers filled with water. Not just any containers, mind you. These were specially made from thick buffalo hide or shaped clay that could handle the shock of a red-hot stone hitting cold water. The result? Instant hot water that released steady, gentle heat for hours, way longer than any crackling fire could manage. This wasn't just about warmth either. The slow steam kept the air inside from getting bone dry during those brutal winter months when the outside air could crack your lips in minutes. But here's where it gets really smart. That heated water didn't just sit there looking pretty. Families poured it into tightly sealed skin bags, creating what we'd recognize today as hot water bottles. These got tucked into sleeping areas where they'd keep radiating warmth against bodies all night long. Sometimes they'd hang damp hides near the steaming containers. The moisture helped everyone breathe easier when the winter air outside was so dry it felt like inhaling sand. Smart thinking when you're dealing with months of sub-zero temperatures. The best part about this whole system? Once you dropped those heated stones in water, you could let your main fire die down to just glowing embers. No more constant wood feeding. No more sparks flying around inside your shelter. Just steady, reliable heat that lasted until morning without any babysitting required. And the weird part is how much heat one good stone could produce. A rock the size of your head, properly heated, could keep a sleeping area warm for 6 to 8 hours. That's better efficiency than most modern space heaters. Of course, managing hot stones and boiling water was just part of staying comfortable through those endless prairie winters. The real magic happened when families mastered the art of layering everything properly. Forget expensive winter gear for a second. Plains tribes had figured out something most modern campers still mess up. Layering wasn't just about throwing on more clothes, it was strategic warfare against hypothermia. Everyone wore multiple layers of furs and soft hides, but the smart part was how they arranged people inside the teepee. Babies and elders always stayed closest to the center where heat pooled naturally. Makes sense, right? The most vulnerable got prime real estate near the warmest spot. But here's where it gets interesting. Families didn't just sleep near each other, they slept practically on top of each other. Body heat from 5 or 6 people crammed together could keep a space warm even when outside temperatures hit brutal lows. Privacy took a back seat to survival, and honestly, dead people don't need personal space anyway. The weird part is how they tracked what worked. Winter counts were basically annual records painted on hides, and they didn't just note big events like battles or good hunts. They recorded the coldest years and exactly how many layers of what materials kept families alive. Talk about data-driven survival. Then there's the footwear situation. Heavy moccasins weren't just shoes. They were engineered insulation systems, multiple layers of hide with fur lining, sometimes stuffed with grass or moss for extra warmth. Frostbite could kill you just as dead as a blizzard, so feet got serious attention. Well, clothing was only half the battle, though. The real genius was combining all these techniques: hot stones warming your bed, layered hides trapping heat around your body, and family members sharing warmth while the banked fire kept embers ready for morning. But even the best clothing and body heat tricks meant nothing if you couldn't move fast when weather turned deadly. Plains life demanded constant mobility, and that's where teepee engineering really had to prove itself. Because when a storm hit, you had maybe an hour to pack everything and relocate before conditions became lethal. Nobody had time to mess around with shelter when a blizzard was rolling in across the plains. These weren't suburban families with weather apps and heated garages. When the wind started howling and snow began falling sideways, you had maybe 30 minutes before things got deadly serious. The teepee design was pure genius for this exact problem. Every single pole, every hide tie, every little detail was built for speed. The framework went up first, long lodge poles arranged in a cone that could be raised by just two people working together. No fancy tools needed, no complicated instructions, just muscle memory and practiced hands moving fast. Then came the buffalo hide cover, stretched and secured with wooden pins that slid through pre-cut holes. The whole family pitched in, each person knowing their exact job. Kids gathered stones for the fire pit, while adults wrestled the heavy hides into place. Even grandparents had specific tasks that kept the process moving. Here's the crazy part. Experienced families could have their entire home assembled, fire burning, and everyone settled inside before most people today could even figure out how to unfold a camping chair. We're talking 45 minutes from bare ground to warm shelter. The quick breakdown was just as crucial. When resources got scarce or weather patterns shifted, the whole camp needed to move fast. Winter on the Great Plains didn't wait for anyone to pack their stuff slowly. Families could dismantle everything, load it onto travois, and be heading toward better conditions while the storm was still building on the horizon. This speed meant survival options that settled communities never had. Bad weather coming from the north, pack up and head south, river freezing over and cutting off water access, move to a different spot, food sources migrating, follow them. But even the fastest tippee setup required one critical element that made all the difference between staying warm and freezing to death. And it wasn't just the speed of construction itself. Those incredible heating systems we just covered needed fuel. But here's where Plains tribes showed their genius. They turned practically everything around them into insulation gold. Buffalo hides got all the glory, sure, but underneath those sleeping areas, willow branches created springy, insulated mattresses that kept bodies off the frozen ground. These weren't random twigs either. Specific types of willow stayed flexible in brutal cold and trapped air pockets like nature's own memory foam. Then there's the ground seal technique that most people never hear about. Families would gather pine needles, dried grass, even fresh snow to stuff into every tiny gap where the teepee met the earth. Snow as insulation sounds crazy until you realize it's mostly trapped air. Pack it right around the base, and you've got a weather seal that costs nothing and works like magic. Reed mats deserve mention too. Where rivers provided materials, these woven barriers added serious wall insulation without much weight. Smart families made them in summer when reeds were perfect, then stored them for winter emergencies. But the weird part is how they handled the really desperate situations. Natural adhesives made from tree sap or thick mud could seal seams when winds got vicious. Some tribes even used a mix of buffalo hair and pine pitch to plug holes that developed during storms. Basically, they turned their shelter into a living, breathing system that could be patched and improved with whatever nature provided. Every single material came from within walking distance of camp. No supply chains, no storage problems, no wondering if materials would run out. The land provided everything needed for survival, but only if you knew exactly what to look for and how to use it properly. This resourcefulness with natural materials was crucial, but it was just one piece of a bigger survival puzzle. The real mastery came from reading the environment itself, knowing when to move, where to position camp, and how to work with nature's rhythms instead of fighting them. That environmental wisdom separated survivors from victims on the unforgiving Great Plains. These weren't people trying to fight nature like some kind of wrestling match. Native Americans on the Great Plains figured out something most of us still haven't learned. You work with the weather, not against it. When winter hit hard, entire camps would pack up and move to spots that made survival easier. Maybe that meant finding a valley that blocked the worst winds, or relocating to a hillside that caught more sunlight during the day. The difference between a sheltered camp and an exposed one could mean life or death when temperatures drop to brutal levels. But here's where it gets clever. Snow wasn't the enemy. It was free insulation. Families would pile snow around the outside walls of their tipis like nature's own weather stripping. That extra layer trapped air and kept the wind from stealing heat right through the hide walls. Snowbanks could add serious warmth to a shelter that was already engineered for harsh conditions. Then there's the fire strategy that saved both fuel and energy. Most people think you need a roaring fire all day long to stay warm. Wrong. Smart families lit fires in the morning to heat up stones and water, then again in the evening for cooking and final warmth. During the day, banked embers under thick ash kept just enough heat alive without wasting precious wood or buffalo dung. The real survival skill was reading the environment like a book. These families could sense weather changes hours before they hit. A shift in wind direction, the way animals moved, even how smoke behaved, all of it gave clues about what was coming next. No weather app needed. And the weird part is how quiet they stayed during storms. Listening helped them track wind patterns and know when conditions were shifting. Sometimes the difference between comfort and disaster was simply knowing when to adjust those smoke flaps or add another layer of hides. This wasn't just camping, it was a complete system of living that turned the Great Plains winter into something survivable, even comfortable.